When the world has got you down. And
Alzheimer's sucks. It's an equal opportunity disease that chips away at everything we hold dear. And to date, there's no cure. So until there is, we continue to fight with the most powerful tool in our arsenal, love. This is Love Conquers Alls, a real and really positive podcast that takes a deep dive into everything Alzheimer's, the good, the bad, and everything in between. And now, here are your hosts, Susie Singer-Carter and me, Don Priest.
Hi, I'm Susie Singer-Carter, and this is Love Conquers Alls. And today I have a very special co-host, which I've never done before, a guest co-host who is another wonderful advocate in the caregiving arena and community, and she's extremely active. She spoke on the Alzheimer's Worldwide Summit with me, and I just adore her, and you're going to love her too. Her name is Trish Lobb. Trish, I'm so excited to have you here.
I'm so excited to be a guest co-host, and I have to just thank Don for letting me take his co-host seat today. I'm excited to work with you, but I'm also super, I next to never say this. I'm really excited about the guests that you've got.
I know, me too. So I don't know about you, but there's been, with the quarantine, I've binged so much TV lately. That's all. I mean, what else can we do besides eat, right? Even my dogs are fat. It's sad. It's really sad. I feel bad about it. I feel not that bad, a little bad, but but I've done a lot of binging, haven't you? I mean, it's not even a guilty pleasure anymore. It's like a necessity. And I run out of really good, and you run out of good projects, right? And so I wasn't really wanting to watch this miniseries, Dopesick. Its subject matter, which is OxyContin and the opiate crisis. And I was like, oh, it's too close to home, because I had a very close family member that was involved in that whole world. But I decided to, because I love Michael Keaton, I like Peter Sarsgaard, and I thought, okay, let me watch it. It was so good. And then I told you about it. You watched it how many times?
Well, okay, I watched it twice back to back. Yeah. And I'll be honest, I heard about it and shame on me. I thought, oh, this is going to be a documentary. It's going to be probably not very riveting. And I could not have been more wrong. Like I said, I watched it back to back 2 times, and it was fascinating, and it's absolutely horrifying at the same time.
Yes.
And I know, Susie, from talking to you, what really caught our attention was the tease at the end of the episode.
Yeah. Well, let's back it up 1 second, because I want to say what Dopesick was about, the investigation of Purdue Laboratory and the Sackler family, and this dynamic duo, these attorney generals from Virginia. One who is our esteemed guest, who is Rick Mountcastle, who was played by Peter Sarsgaard brilliantly, and his partner, Randy Ramseyer. Just riveting, you guys. But then on the finale, they, just when they're tying up the final bow, as it were, on this case, in walks another case presented by Randy to Rick about another crisis in pharma, which was a drug called Dopesick, which has been extremely abused along with other drugs in the nursing home. And it's touched me very closely. And my mom is a victim of that kind of abuse. And I found it so interesting because Danny Strong is the showrunner, and he was saying, the powerful thing is to put a face to crisis. When you can put a human face to crisis, it creates change, right? It's important.
Absolutely.
It's important. Otherwise, it's just noise. And so they did it brilliantly by putting us into the actual lives of these investigators and really see them be crusaders, really. And then watch somebody like Michael Keaton's character, this incredibly moral and empathetic doctor, get conquered almost by this drug. So it really put a face on it for me. It made me frame how I looked at my family member that became addicted to it. And so it's powerful. And I think that's why I personally wanted to talk to Rick, because he went on to take on another pharma, which is Abbott Labs, and they manufacture Dopesick, which is a drug that I didn't know anything about. This drug. My mom was given it in the hospital and suddenly she was in a wheelchair after being ambulatory and became incontinent. And she was literally like someone had given her a lobotomy. And I didn't know until about 2 months after she got out of the hospital that her GP alerted me that she was on a drug called Depakote, and that it was actually quite deadly for people in the elder community. So this is absolutely terrifying. And when I got my mom off of it, she never walked again. You've had experience with that as well, Trish, with your dad.
Right, with my dad, not only with Depakote, but another medication that's being used off-label for the same kind of wrong purpose that Depakote's been being used. But I'll let Rick get into that. What happened with Depakote, and that, to me, my experience, that applies to several other medications as well.
Exactly. Well, I cannot express how esteemed this guest is. He and his partner have received the Department of Justice Achievement Award by Attorney General Eric Holder and Executive Office for U.S. Attorney's Director H. Marshall Jarrett, who said, and I quote, that he is continually humbled by their resiliency, dedication, and unparalleled work ethic to accomplish this noble mission. Today's awardees exemplify what it truly means to be a patriot, and it is an honor to recognize them for their extraordinary service. And it's an honor for us to invite Rick Mountcastle to our show. How are you, Mr. Mountcastle?
Well, I am doing great, Susie and Trish, and thank you for inviting me to participate in your podcast. It's an honor. It's particularly an honor because I view your audience, who I believe would mostly be caregivers for patients with dementia. I view them as real heroes. I know I've never dealt with a relative with dementia, but I did take care of my aging mother for a number of years, and I know how much work, how much patience, how much effort goes into taking care of a loved one. And just knowing, you add that onto that, Alzheimer's, those people that are in the audience, you guys are really heroes. So it's an honor for me to be here.
Thank you so much for saying that. I know everyone else appreciates that. We feel that way about caregivers because they are the uncelebrated heroes. And so thank you for saying that.
Yes, they're heroes that don't get enough recognition. And so thank you for giving me this opportunity to maybe give them a little bit of recognition. I just appreciate you guys so much.
Ditto. Well, thank you. I think we're going to jump into, we have so much to ask you.
Can I just say one thing before?
Yes. Oh, yes.
One of the things I have to do, because I'm a lawyer, so we've always got some legal, fine print, is I need to just put some fine print into this podcast, if I can do that right now.
Absolutely. Legitimize us.
So I just want to make it clear that my statements and comments during this podcast are my personal views and opinions and are in no way related to any position with either federal or state government that I've had in the past or may have currently.
We will also have that in the show notes and on the screen. So no shenanigans, people.
So I know a bit about the story, but Rick, could you explain to everybody, share with everybody how you and Randy became aware of the Depakote crisis and what that means?
Yes. So we, at the time I lived, and Randy still lives, in a town called Abingdon, Virginia, in far southwest Virginia, not to be confused with West Virginia. It is in Virginia, in the far southwestern corner. It's a few miles from Tennessee. It's basically coal country. It's in the middle of the Appalachian Mountains. And many of the people depicted in Dopesick, in the scenes, the mining scenes and the scenes locally, are just like the people that are depicted in that miniseries. Working class, work very hard jobs. Many of them in the coal mining industry, farming, other jobs in which they get injuries. And so in the late 1990s, and for many years even before that, one of the main issues in that region was the abuse of prescription drugs that had been going on for decades down there. And in the late 1990s, we were looking at ways to get at that problem. We prosecuted a number of doctors for overprescribing opioids and other painkillers. And in the course of doing that, we discovered in the late 1990s that there's this new drug coming into play called OxyContin. It was the drug that was in demand. It was the drug that doctors were prescribing. It was the drug that was being abused on the streets down there. And it was a drug that was fueling a lot of other crimes, property crimes, thefts, burglaries. There were communities being devastated by it. And we were sitting around the office one afternoon after work talking about cases, and hey, we're prosecuting doctors. We've got all these street drug dealers that we're going after. And we're hearing anecdotally about from pharmacists, local pharmacists who know their community. It's a small town. They know who's into what and who's got legitimate pain and prescriptions and the like, complaining about sales reps from Purdue Pharma who were being aggressive and coming into the pharmacies and demanding that they fill prescriptions, even ones that they were hesitant to fill. So in our conversations, we just were talking and said, well, maybe we need to take a look at a level above the doctors. Maybe we need to take a look at Purdue Pharma and see what they're doing, what's going on here. And so that kind of kicked off the case. It was a feeling that we had an obligation to our community, which was being devastated by this drug, to try to get to the root of the problem.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I'm in Los Angeles, the opposite of rural, and and when it started to get prevalent here, it was really nicknamed like the white collar heroin, because it was widely abused, but nobody really talked about it because it was prescribed.
Yeah. So yeah, and of course it was called down here. It was called hillbilly heroin. And as was depicted in the miniseries, Purdue targeted those areas where there were a lot of people who were getting injured on the job and having to go to the doctor and get painkillers, like, Virginia, Kentucky, sort of all those mining areas, as well as Maine, where they have the lumber and the logging and all that. Those were like the first areas targeted to launch the drug into OxyContin.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, that's so interesting. So then how did Depakote come to you, and how did you embrace that after going through this extremely grueling, long investigation? And if you haven't watched this miniseries, do, because you're going to be absolutely riveted. Because it's a daunting. I've gone to court just to protect my mom at one point, and I literally went 3 times and I had no standing, and I was her legal conservator of person, and I had no standing to make any decisions that were really important. And I asked the judge, who does then, if not me? Mm-hmm. And there's just no good answer. So I find the court systems extremely frustrating. So, with someone like to watch this and see you continue to prevail and be resilient, and it's amazing. So at the end of the episode 8, the finale, after, like I said, you had gone through this whole grueling, intense investigation with frustrations and so on and so forth, then all of a sudden now you're presented with another pharma fiasco. What motivated you?
Well, it was an area that was interesting, even though it was hard. Number one. Number two, it felt like it was work that had a very huge purpose. Mm-hmm. It had a national impact. And I had gotten into the business of being a lawyer, and particularly being a prosecutor, because I wanted to help people. I wanted to make people's lives better. So that another case like Dopesick case, which was pretty clear that they were, I don't want to say, well, in a way, abusing vulnerable people, elderly, dementia patients confined to nursing homes. I mean, I don't know how much more vulnerable you can get.
And voiceless. Yeah.
Case that for me personally was, this is the reason I'm doing this work. And so that was, the hesitancy. I will say that the hesitancy that's shown in the Hulu miniseries is an exaggeration. It's a dramatic exaggeration. Okay.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's interesting. You always wonder what the motivation is, and you're kind of like too good to be true. I say that with such respect and love, because I went through such a hard time, like I said, in the court system, and got so disillusioned by, I am Pollyanna from the get-go, and always thought, well, right is right. The truth will out. And it doesn't always will out. Right? Right.
Yep.
So clearly you took that case, but if you had not been through the case with Purdue Pharma, do you think you would have pursued Dopesick?
That's a difficult question to answer. I'm not sure that the Dopesick case would have even come to us. And here's what I mean by that. So the Dopesick case was originated by a whistleblower out of from Georgia by the name of Meredith McCoy. And she had retained an attorney, a whistleblower attorney. And so these cases, these pharmaceutical cases, when you have a whistleblower, they're filing a civil action under the False Claims Act. And these cases involving a national pharmaceutical company can be filed anywhere in the United States. And there are 74 U.S. attorneys' offices and court districts federally across the United States. So, that case could have been filed in any one of the 74 courts, federal courts across the United States. And I think the reason it came to us is twofold. Number one, our success with the Purdue case had become known. So it, was apparent that the Western District of Virginia, which a very small U.S. Attorney's Office, had some expertise and success in that area in dealing with off-label marketing of pharmaceutical. And our partner in the Purdue case, the Virginia Attorney General's Office Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, had, the director of that was very much in tune with, he was there was this national organization called the National Association of Medicaid Fraud Control Units. And they have a lot of contact with whistleblower attorneys. And the head of the Virginia Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, again, and I'll speak to that group in a little bit, but he had gone and I think somehow had a discussion with the attorney for Meredith McCoy and convinced them to file that case in our district. So that's how it comes to us. Without the Purdue case, it probably goes to one of the other districts that does more of these cases, like Boston or Philadelphia. So that's how it came to us. And so 2 months after the sentencing in the Purdue case, we get this new pharma case, again, working in partnership with the Virginia Medicaid Fraud Control Unit.
So, yeah, I have one other question, because when you brought up whistleblowers, I was thinking, if someone wanted to take on that moniker as a whistleblower, and you have to go through a lawyer, is that something that is out of pocket for you, or how does that work?
The answer is no. Whistleblower lawyers will take on cases on a contingency basis. So, if you wanted to retain one, they'll screen your case, they'll vet your case. And if they're willing to take it, you'll have to sign some sort of an agreement that involves that they'll be able to recover their costs, and they'll get a certain percentage. And, I'm not exactly sure. It could be as much as 50% or more of the recovery. But you don't necessarily have to have a big chunk of cash going into those cases. But you do need to have a lot of information. Okay. And I would say a lot of inside information, because a whistleblower complaint, what starts off, they file a complaint in court that's under seal. There are a lot of technicalities that are involved in that kind of a legal complaint and legal proceeding. And what they're hoping is that the federal government or even a state government will do what's called, they'll intervene and kind of take over the case for them, but that's not necessarily a given because of how few resources there are in the government to devote to that area. But you don't have to be wealthy going in. You don't have to have out-of-pocket money. You just have to have good information, and usually it's good inside information.
That's really good information. Thank you.
Yeah, so generally, I would add that the best whistleblowers are former employees of a company. Okay. And because they know what's going on inside the company, they know who's making decisions, they know what directives are being pushed out to the sales force. An outsider, a consumer, a patient is probably not going to have sufficient information to have a good whistleblower attorney take on their case.
So Rick, Susie and I are kind of familiar with what happened with Depakote, but for the people who are not familiar with that, can you explain to them what the issue was and how it was being used improperly?
Yes. So in a kind of in a nutshell way, Depakote is a drug that's been around a long time. I think at least since the early 80s. It's approved by the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, for three things. It's approved for the treatment of epileptic seizures. It's approved for the treatment of bipolar mania, and it's approved for the treatment as a prophylaxis for migraine headaches. Okay. And so what happened was, in the late 1990s, Abbott Labs, who is the manufacturer of Depakote, wanted to expand its market. And for a variety of reasons that we can talk about in more detail, they saw a niche in the nursing home business, where Depakote, they would market Depakote for the treatment of agitation in dementia patients confined to nursing homes, which is completely off-label. Off-label meaning it's not approved by the Food and Drug Administration. And they set up a long-term care division within the company to do nothing but promote it for this unapproved use. They promoted it as being safe and effective to treat agitation and other behaviors that dementia patients sometimes get when, especially when they're in an unfamiliar setting and they have unfamiliar people trying to take care of them.
They become combative. Combative, right? And there are behavioral ways to deal with that.
Right. The main effect of Depakote for those folks was to make them sleep. So in effect, it was a chemical restraint, is what it's called in the business, or chemical straitjacket. So you have somebody that's acting out. In the old days, probably way back, they used to put them in straitjackets so they couldn't use their arms, couldn't hurt themselves or somebody else. Well, that's not. We don't do that anymore. But give them a drug, put them to sleep, and now they're not a problem. They're not being combative. They're not fighting with anybody, that kind of thing. And so, that's just plain wrong, right?
Right.
And you have a population that cannot speak out about that.
And if I'm not mistaken, is it true that I think it was 1987 that they made that law that you cannot chemically restrain someone? These drugs that they had been using previously, could no longer be used unless it was protecting the safety of the person. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. What came out in 1987? It's called OBRA, Omnibus Budget Reconciliation Act of 1987, put into place a whole set of new standards for nursing homes. And so up to that point in time, what had been used on dementia patients who were having those kind of behaviors and agitation and combativeness were these antipsychotic drugs like Seroquel, Zyprexa, Risperdal, which were very dangerous, very, very dangerous. In fact, all those drugs, I think, ended up having to include a warning about the risk of death in elderly patients with dementia.
Is that the same as a black label?
Yes. It's called a black box warning.
Okay.
And we can talk about that in more detail.
Definitely.
I'll try not to make it too boring, but
no, it's not boring because if I didn't know that, my mom would probably not be here with us.
Right.
It's a very technical thing. So they all had black box warnings that said, hey, you have a significantly increased risk of death. That's for these antipsychotics if they're administered to elderly patients with dementia. And so the purpose of the 1987 law was to pull back on that, to make it more difficult for providers in nursing homes to prescribe those kinds of drugs, unless they had to set out a specific mental health diagnosis. They had to include drug holidays where they would take that patient off of the drug for a period of time, see how they did without it. It included the requirement that they try other non-drug measures to deal with that behavior or that agitation. Well, what Abbott saw was, that all applies to those antipsychotics. It doesn't apply to Depakote. Okay, so we can go in and kind of swoop in and take over where they used to prescribe those antipsychotics to for agitation in dementia patients. We'll swoop in and say, well, now that you guys have a problem doing that because of the rules, you can use Depakote and it's not subject to those rules. So that's where all of a sudden you had this huge increase in the use of Depakote in nursing homes to control the agitation in dementia patients. And they pushed that, and they made billions of dollars off of it.
And they made it, and how did they do that? How did they get away with those kinds of things? Like from what I heard, they were manufacturing it to make it sound so lovely, like sprinkles that they would sprinkle into the patient's food that no longer could chew. Correct?
Yeah, correct. So the Depakote had black box warnings, right? Even back then. Okay. It had black box warnings because it had the potential to cause liver damage. It was a warning about women who were pregnant taking it because it could cause birth defects, and there was a black box warning because it caused something called pancreatitis, I guess inflammation of the pancreas. Those were the three black box warnings. But what Abbott did was they conducted these studies, and this is how, just like it was shown with Purdue in the Hulu miniseries, Abbott, like all pharmaceutical companies, conducted studies. And, the studies were, of course, if you read them very closely, they were inconclusive at best and were just, completely didn't help them at all at worst. But they cherry picked language out of the articles written about those studies. And so for Depakote, there was language in a study that it appears to have a beneficial effect in the treatment in patients, in dementia patients with agitation. They don't exhibit that agitation. But so that's the language they cherry picked, but they didn't include the additional language that we're not sure whether this is due to the fact that Depakote causes somnolence, so that it could be that the reason they're not agitated is because they're asleep. Okay.
Yes.
And that therefore the findings of this study are inconclusive and further studies required. So they don't take that language, they just cherry pick the parts of the study that is going to be a marketing tool for them.
Sure. And
Yeah.
Systemically, this whole, they had such an opening for this because, our skilled nursing homes and our assisted living are so understaffed and at the best places, there's just not enough staff, and there's no regulation for it, as far as I know, for how many, the minimal amount of caregivers or nurses are needed per resident. So, I can see why it would feel attractive when you're overworked and you can't attend to all these people. I've been in situations where my mother was in one place where it was like walking into the cuckoo's nest, and it didn't have to be, right? I mean, these are all lovely people. The people that were there were lovely. They were just not being attended to.
Yes.
So, Rick, with these promotional materials that in theory the sales staff are relying on, and then the nursing homes are in theory relying on the accuracy of these studies and stuff, who's overseeing those marketing materials? Who's supposed to be overseeing those to see that the language is actually, verifiable?
Yeah, so you're referring to the government agency that is kind of overseeing
Possibly.
that, making sure the rules are being followed, right?
Well, kind of, yeah.
So that would be the Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. And so here's the thing about the FDA is this: there's two issues that are there with the FDA. Okay, so there's an office within the FDA. It used to be called the Division of Drug Marketing. It had this long name. The acronym was DDMAC. It's now called something else, but they're responsible for reviewing all the promotional materials, particularly the ones that are direct to consumer, to patient. But they're responsible for reviewing all pharmaceutical company promotional materials. Now, and I was reading something that back in 2010, they had a staff of 57 at FDA responsible for reviewing all promotional materials for pharmaceuticals. And during that year, there were 35,000 promotional materials that need to be reviewed by a staff of 57. So you can imagine, with that kind of ratio, they are not physically able to thoroughly review every piece of promotion by a pharmaceutical company.
Was that strategized by, do you think that was part of their strategy to disseminate that much material, knowing that they wouldn't be able?
No, I think this is just, you have so many pharmaceutical companies out there. Okay. And that's sort of the amount of promotional materials they put out there. But I think they know, okay, how understaffed the FDA is and how difficult it will be for an FDA employee assigned to that office to find a particular a needle in the haystack, right, and focus in on one particular piece of promotion that is false and fraudulent, basically.
Eventually, Depakote did get a black label or black box warning for the elderly people that with dementias in particular. At least that's what my mother's GP said. I don't know if you're aware but this is a black label drug that could be deadly for someone with dementia. And so that's how I had first heard about it. I never heard of it. So did it actually have an official warning to that extent? And if so, how did it get that?
Yes, Susie, I'm not aware that it had a specific black box warning geared towards the elderly, but if one of its main side effects is somnolence, and as I recall, one of the other side effects, some of the other side effects were loss of appetite and dehydration. I think it's very easy to see how that drug could be deadly to an elderly patient in a nursing home, because those are the things that are very dangerous, right? Lack of malnutrition, that leads to all kinds of other problems in that setting. Dehydration, right? And then somnolence. Okay, now they're just like laid out in a bed, not moving. They're malnourished, and now you start to have pressure sores and all those other things.
Can I add one other thing? When you're dehydrated, and a lot of elderly, when they're dehydrated, bladder infections are a huge deal there. And bladder infections are, they manifest in psychological ways. Like that's one of the first things they check if someone is being combative. So what they're doing is just basically exasperating what they're trying to quell. Yes.
So I think it's very easy for, someone who has any kind of experience in treating geriatric patients to see, hey, if this is what happens with that drug, that could be deadly.
Yeah. I'm lucky, but I don't think everyone, I know that everyone doesn't have such a great doctor. I'm so thankful and grateful that he made that call to me, because without him alerting me, I would have never known. I thought this was the end.
I think Susie and Rick both are hitting on something really important. What I really learned from Dopesick, and then this is tying into the investigation into Depakote, is I had never been aware of a black box warning. I didn't know how to find one. I didn't know what it meant. I now understand, I think, the value of knowing what the FDA approved usages of a medication are. And so I'm not sure everybody that's listening really, they may not be familiar with that terminology of a black box warning and the importance of knowing the FDA usages. I mean, Rick, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes. Yes. And for the caregivers that are listening, maybe a couple of pointers here. Number one, when the person you're taking care of is prescribed a medication, there's this very dense pamphlet that comes with it, more than just the little label that's on the bottom. There's this, the pharmacy that I go to staples this packet of papers to the bag, which, it's very normal to pull it off and throw it in the trash and go and get the bottle. But if you're a caregiver, you should look at that. I know it's a little bit difficult, but look for the side effects and look for it's called a black box warning because it's going to be in that packet of papers, that label, it's called the label, and it's going to be outlined in black, hence the black box warning. And that black box warning is put in there whenever the FDA determines that based on the data, there is a very serious potential for a side effect, a very dangerous side effect, especially if it's a side effect that could result in death. That's where that's going to be. And so it's very important to read that. The other thing that I think the listeners should know is that a licensed physician has a legal right to prescribe a drug off-label for an unapproved use. So if you're taking care of someone, particularly if they're in a skilled nursing facility and you're the caregiver, and you're getting the notices when they change medications, ask questions about that. Because just because the order comes from a licensed physician doesn't mean the FDA has approved it for that. You need to check that. You need to read the label, understand what it's been approved for, because that's going to be in the label. And if your prescribing physician, who oftentimes is the physician who has the contract with the skilled nursing facility, right? They're only part-timers. Right. They barely see a lot of those patients. They've got a busy practice and they're doing this on the side. If they make a medication change, you need to be all over that. You need to check that. You need to find out why. You need to make sure that drug is approved for that use. And if it's not, then you've got a lot of other questions that you should be asking.
Right. If you know your loved one or you're the person you're caring for, you will see changes and you need to question them. You know, I made every mistake in the book. I have, and like I said, I thought my mom, this was the progression of Alzheimer's. That's what I thought, and I wouldn't have known it. So if you have any intuition or something doesn't feel right, or you know, there's a sudden change in the person that you're caring for, I think it calls for further investigation of your own, just to be sure. What are they taking? They don't tell you. They don't, you know, I'm my mom's conservator person, but I don't get a list of drugs. I have to ask for them.
Right. And Susie, you know, with my dad he was in skilled rehab, and they prescribed, my dad at that time had been living with Alzheimer's for probably 18 years. And I didn't know any of this stuff that we're talking about today. Yeah. And a physician who never even met my father prescribed Seroquel, which is an antipsychotic. This is 2012, which is clearly after 1987. Mm-hmm. And Seroquel happens to, its black box label happens to say that it can be deadly for elders living with dementia. Now, I knew every cell in my body knew something was wrong. And my mom, as power of attorney, went and said, you may not give this to my husband. We didn't know why, but everything we were lucky. We were just lucky. Now I realize that, you know, if I'd had the information that we're getting today, I could have looked that medication up. I've been on the FDA's website a lot lately looking up medications.
Yeah.
So it's not that hard to use. But yeah, I mean, getting the information that Rick, you're providing today is actually a little bit terrifying for me, because I realize how dangerous the things that were happening to my dad really were.
And you all know how many of the medication changes are done in a skilled nursing facility, right?
Tell us.
Yes, tell us.
do tell, Ray, do tell.
Because you got, so oftentimes it's a nurse who sees that, oh, that patient, something's going on with that patient. They're acting thus and such. And they will call the doctor and say, doctor, the doctor's, he or she is out doing something else, doing their own direct normal, their normal job. Doctor, this is what's going on with this patient. I think we should prescribe whatever, Zyprexa, okay, or whatever. The doctor oftentimes is just a rubber stamp for that nurse without ever seeing the patient. Just based on what that nurse has told the doctor over the telephone, the doctor will approve that prescription. Right. So, especially in those in a skilled nursing setting, if there's any kind of change or an addition of medication, there's and I know there's so much that caregivers already have to do, and I just don't want to add another burden, but that is the one thing that needs to be questioned, is because understand that the physician is making those prescriptions and making those changes in the medications oftentimes without actually laying eyes on that patient.
It's mind-blowing.
Yes.
It's absolutely mind-blowing. It seems like it's the most unconscionable thing that you could do, and yet it goes on, like you said. It's part of it's part of the that whole culture, that whole industry, and right. and it's systemic. It's scary as hell, because, like I said, we don't know even if you are the legal conservator, you're not going to be privy to that information. You're privy to the, if they need money, it, and that's when they get in touch with you. And so it's everything else you have to, unfortunately, like you said, Rick, is you have to be proactive. You have to advocate. You have to be the ears and the eyes and the voice for the person that you're caring for. And which is why we're trying to make it easier for caregivers and to let people know that they're doing an enormous job. And we need support from every aspect of our society. Like you were talking about Medicaid and Medicare, and they're responsible for the regulations, correct?
So in terms of the prescription use of prescription drugs, that's the Food and Drug Administration. So Medicare and Medicaid, they regulate they regulate the nursing homes and how the nursing homes conduct business. And one of the things that I think is a problem is that none of the states and the federal government, neither the federal government nor any of the states, require any kind of staffing levels for nursing homes. It's all very, very vague. It's must provide sufficient staff to provide the level of care that's set forth in the regulations. So there's no, hey, if you've got, for every 15 patients, you need to have 2 CNAs. There's nothing like that. And that's a product, again, of the politics of the politics of money, basically, is that the nursing home lobby make sure that those kinds of requirements are not put into place in anywhere in the law. And the result is, nursing homes operate for profit. And your biggest, so maximize revenue, minimize cost. Your biggest cost are the labor costs. Right. So if the less staff you have, fewer your costs, and the more profit you have. So
it's profit as opposed to patients, profit ahead of the patients, really.
Correct. Yes, that's the system. Okay. So, and I'm sure that the caregivers listening to this podcast who have dealt with their loved ones in a skilled nursing facility have seen the chronic understaffing. And my mother, I was in rehab in a skilled nursing facility that was reputed to be very good for, I guess it was maybe around 85 or 90 days. And you could just see the chronic understaffing. And I felt really bad for the certified nursing assistants, the CNAs, who were doing their best, for the LPNs, the licensed practical nurses who are providing the hands-on care. They're trying their best, but when you're understaffed and they've got call bells going off all over the place, there's only so much they can do. Okay. And, and maybe things are getting better now, but the CNAs who are actually taking hands-on care of our loved ones in skilled nursing facilities are paid a pittance for what they do.
Yeah, I stay very close with the CNAs where my mom's at, and I feel very compassionate for them. And especially now during the pandemic, and we've had a surge in the past couple of weeks here at least in Los Angeles. It's been rampant, and every day it's now increasing, where we get text messages and phone calls that say another 10 staff members have been sent home. Another 12 staff members have tested positive. I don't know how they're going to handle it if it continues. And I don't know who steps in at what point. What if, I just don't know what's going to happen. I'm panic about it. And I talked to my mom's, the nurse that sets up our Zoom calls, because we can't visit our loved ones now. And she is exhausted. And there's the face, people. There's the face behind all of this disaster. What do we do about that? How can we as caregivers step in and make noise and make change?
So Susie, I want to take that and tag on to go back to something that Rick talked about, because I experienced the way that the medications get exactly as you described. A nurse observes something, calls a doctor that rubber stamps it, and then it just compounds. And I think I will tell you, at one point, my family told the nurse on duty that my dad couldn't have a certain medication. She literally looked at me and said, well, what do you want me to prescribe for him? And I looked at her, and with every ounce of kindness I had, I said, I don't remember getting a nursing or medical degree. Like, how what? You want me to tell you what medication? But I think for the people who are listening, as Susie mentioned, yes, caregivers are already overwhelmed. But I can tell you from my own experience, if you have somebody in a skilled nursing, whether it's rehab or a home, one of the most valuable and important things you can do is be a patient advocate in regard to medications, because once that cocktail of many different medications are put together, then you start having all these other symptoms and behaviors and everything else. My dad was in skilled rehab. It was supposed to be 5 days. It ended up being 63. And there were 4 distinct times when he was given the wrong medications and it almost killed him.
Sure.
They hung IV bags. And this all goes back to the fact that they're so grossly understaffed. But as a family member, before they gave him a med or they gave him an IV, we checked it. Because 4 different times the medications they gave him would have killed him. And, it's a catch-22, but what the caregiver can do is learn to be a patient advocate and look at those meds and look for those black box warnings.
And what do you do? Let's say, we discover that this kind of thing is going on, regardless of the reason why. We all know there's legitimate reasons. What can we do?
You're talking about in the big picture, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to make some changes. We need to make some changes. I mean, I literally made a video for our governor here, during the COVID, at the crisis, and I was like, I put together the most compassionate, tear-jerking thing, trying to get his attention. Anyway, that it didn't work.
So I guess for me, my personal opinion is that the understaffing is the root of so many problems that come up in skilled nursing facilities. And so there's got to be a coming together, a coalition, of some sort of a movement by caregivers, okay, as the voice for their loved ones who are having to live in skilled nursing facilities, to get the states to require a specific minimum level of staffing. I don't know that I've been looking at skilled nursing facilities probably for 8 or 9 years now. I don't know that there's any kind of group that is really out there pushing for that. I've not seen that. But again, my personal opinion from what I've just seen anecdotally is that, the things that government regulators look for in skilled nursing facilities are pressure sores, lack of nutrition, dehydration, all those things. Those things happen because of understaffing. There's not enough time for the staff to properly feed those who need to have help feeding. There's not enough time for the staff to make sure that, they're getting sufficient hydration, that they've got the drinks that they need.
And hygiene.
Clean, making sure they're clean, dealing with incontinence. There are, I hear stories now where there's complaints being made about a loved one who basically sat in urine-soaked clothes for 6 hours in a wheelchair. Yep. My reaction to that, because of the work I've done, and it's very sad, is that's just a normal day in the life of somebody in a nursing home. And that's really sad. Yep. And that's because they are understaffed. Okay. And until there's outrage, that's expressed by caregivers, by family members, that they express that outrage to the state legislatures, to state government, and demand that standards be put in place that skilled nursing facilities have to follow in terms of how many staff, the staffing ratios. Until staffing ratios are there that they have to follow, then nothing's going to change. Right.
Yeah, no, and it's so bad. I'm sure you've heard of this, where there's people that they can't afford to be in a nursing home. They can't afford to be in assisted living, and they'll go to a hospital for some treatment that they need, and then they're left somewhere. Someone with dementia is just left on a corner, and we are a terrible society in that we don't take care of that, and we, if we don't see it, it's not there, and that's unfortunate. That's unfortunately what's going on. If it's the blind eye, and that's what's happening. You're so right. This is why Trish and I are talking about. This is why I have this podcast. This is why I've just become an official caregiving.com champion, because I'm out there wanting to be, amplify this crisis. It's a crisis.
Yeah, and it's getting worse. So think about this: back pre-COVID, okay, you had at least the nursing home or the skilled nursing facility residents who had family members that could advocate for them. They had that, right? But there have always been a group who are in those nursing facilities, particularly the ones that are funded by Medicaid, your less economically advantaged folks, who have no one. I mean, I have seen cases over and over again where so-and-so has been in this nursing home for years and they don't have a family member that comes to visit them. And that is just, that's heart-wrenching, right?
Yep.
And consequently, their care is the worst because there's nobody advocating for them. Now with COVID, nobody can get in.
Nobody.
And so, yeah.
And do you know how many people have died? They've died from being isolated. It's not just, an anecdote. It is science. People can't survive being isolated.
Right. No. Plus, you think about how when the caregivers, the family members were able to get in, how much they did, right? They went and fetched the drinks. They went and checked and made sure that the food was eaten properly because they knew that the staff there did not have the ability to do that because of understaffing. Mm-hmm. So now more than ever, when those family members who were supplementing the paid staff by taking care of their own loved ones, now more than ever, when those folks cannot get in, there's a need for adequate staffing ratios to be put in place and mandated to these skilled nursing facilities, and these, particularly the corporate ones. Okay, right. Those are the biggest offenders.
And reaction is not a solution. We need to put plans in place because we're already understaffed, and now we have a pandemic that is making that tenfold, right? So what is going to happen? And even if you didn't go in and be an assistant caregiver, hands-on with your parent, the very fact that you could drop in at any moment keeps people on their toes. So again, back to the big picture, where do we go? We have our coalition. Now what do we do?
All right, now we need to start advocating to the state governments, particularly in the individual states, to put in place staffing ratios that make sense. So I guess part of that is maybe consulting with skilled nursing facility experts, to say, well, how many CNAs do you need per every 10 or every 20 residents in a skilled nursing facility?
Like we do in education. We do that for children, right? We say how many teachers per student.
And how many do you need for a dementia ward, right? Because they need more care.
Right. Indeed.
I don't, my sense, maybe I'm wrong, but my sense is that from a corporate level, the skilled nursing facilities staff dementia wards just like they staff the rest of the facility. And so I think part of it, and I don't, maybe this is your show here is where this gets kind of put together, is getting some experts to help. Gosh, I can't believe that this has to have been done at some point. Somebody has to have looked at this because this problem has been in existence for a long time. But come up with what constitutes a reasonable, rational staffing plan based on a patient kind of mix. You get these kind of patients in these skilled nursing facilities. What are the different kinds you get there? How much care does each one of those need? And then come up with a plan for how this place should be adequately staffed.
Right. Absolutely. And when a family member is identified at different stages of their disease in terms of dementia, can I just assure you that you're charged more? And if someone is incontinent, you're being significantly charged more for that kind of care. So in terms of economics, that should be addressed, in that if you're charging my family more for that service, then that service isn't getting done because you're understaffed. That's a violation to me of services, right? If that's what they're charging you for. And, and we're giving our budget towards that. So we expect it to be done. I mean, I think until you get into this community and you really see behind the curtain what's going on, you assume I'm paying $8,000 to $10,000 a month. Of course, my parent or my husband or my wife is being cared for. They're not.
As I say, I think for people who are going to be faced with finding some sort of facility for a loved one, the patient to professional ratio is one of the first questions you need to ask. How many CNAs, how many nurses per how many patients?
Right.
And that to me is the critical question. And there's a big,
ratio,
wide variance too.
But even still, like where my mom's been at the very best in Los Angeles, and even then it's understaffed. Yeah. To Rick's point is that the price for employees is their highest price tag. And so that's where they make their cuts the most. And I saw it, it's blatant. I don't know how any of the social workers can go in and not see the chaos.
It kind of moving a level closer to the patient from the overall, it's some sort of coalition to change the staffing. Let's say you have a loved one in a facility and you think that things are not the way that they should be in regard to medications or treatment. What does someone do then? Where do they take that kind of complaint?
Yeah, so assuming you've complained to the staff there, which would of course be, you go to the front desk and I want to see the RN on duty or all that, and you get no results. Or if you're concerned about a medication that's being prescribed off-label, and you're not getting that changed. So, I thought about this beforehand. The place I think to go is the State Department of Health, for two reasons. First, the Department of Health is usually, and it may vary depending on what state you're in, but that's usually the state agency that's responsible for inspecting and regulating the skilled nursing facilities. Every skilled nursing facilities by federal law must be inspected on an annual basis. And so the inspectors are normally employees of the State Department of Health. So they have that kind of jurisdiction generally. Now it may be different depending on what state you're in. So you'd have to go and maybe look up which state agency regulates skilled nursing facilities, but that's the one starting point. And the other place to look at is if you have some concerns about how a physician or a prescriber, could be, I think in many states, RNs can prescribe certain drugs, how that person is prescribing, the place to go if you can't get any kind of a response from that prescriber or the facility would be to the Department of Health Professionals, because every prescriber, whether they're a physician or a registered nurse, or even a licensed practical nurse, are registered with and licensed by the state's department. We call in Virginia the Department of Health Professionals, not to be confused with the Department of Health, but there's an agency that regulates how people with licenses, medical providers with licenses, conduct themselves. And so the place to go there, if you can't get any kind of redress directly, would be to make a complaint to that state licensing agency. Okay. Those are probably, in terms of practical, those are probably the two practical places to go to. And of course, HHS has their 1-800 hotline, waste, fraud, and abuse hotline, but you're calling a 1-800 number and either leaving a recording or talking to a call center. Your results are going to be rather slow and cumbersome, so you have to do it at the state or local level.
How productive is the like adult protective services? Is that a protective?
Yes, adult protective services. That's another place. Yes, definitely. Okay.
Social services too, I think, because I know as a conservator, they come and do a report on a yearly basis at least. I mean, it's only a yearly basis, but at least you have that person that is assigned to you as a conservator that you can talk to, and that, their job is to make sure that the person that you are caring for is being cared for.
Yes. Yeah, I think they call them ombudsman in Virginia, but I think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So every state has that adult protective service and conservator or ombudsman position.
Yes.
They're a little bit limited in what they can do, but but some of them are pretty diligent. I've worked with some of those adult protective services folks, and they're pretty good. Yeah,
I had one that was very, very, very proactive, and I liked it. I said, "Thank you. I enjoy you grilling me." No, I liked it. So I think you can find. There's always a gem to find, and I always say, make friends with those people that are helping you. Those are your allies, right? I mean, it's so important to build a tribe, because it's really hard to do it alone. It's really hard.
Oh yeah.
The situation with skilled nursing facilities, and especially with COVID and everything, to me, that's one of the most shameful things our country has allowed. But I actually think there's something more shameful than that, and that's pharmaceutical companies that capitalize on our most vulnerable population. So kind of in that light, I don't think that you've covered what the result of your investigation into Depakote was. What happened with Abbott Labs? What was their, I hate to say punishment, but kind of.
I would call it punishment, because Abbott Labs pled guilty. They pled guilty to a criminal charge involving what's called misbranding of a drug. Misbranding kind of being a legal technical term for basically promoting it off-label, promoting it for a use that was not approved, and doing a promotion for a use without providing adequate directions for use based on that population. So they pled guilty to a crime. The company did. Penalty for that was a total of $700 million. The on the civil side, on the whistleblower part of the case, Abbott Labs ended up paying $800 million in penalties and restitution to federal healthcare benefit programs, as well as I think maybe $100 million for violating state consumer protection laws. So it was a total of $1.6 billion in penalties. So this is definitely personal opinion. No individuals were prosecuted. I will say that our office, like in the Purdue case, wanted to prosecute individuals, and we were not allowed to do that by the Department of Justice. And I think that is a problem, a whole different problem, a whole different discussion for another podcast.
Yes,
about how we handle those cases.
Yes, yeah. We had a little tiny opportunity to talk to Rick beforehand, just to make sure, because it's such a huge topic, and that I didn't bring that up because I knew that's a whole nother that's a rabbit hole to go down, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now, was if I remember right, you said that Abbott Labs had a long-term care division that was not necessarily, I'm not sure what word, ethical. Did they have to close that down as a result of this?
They did. They ended up closing it down probably during the investigation. It was kind of, yeah. So if you're not approved to market your product in nursing homes for the treatment of agitation dementia patients, it's pretty blatant to have set up a long-term care division just to do that in your corporate structure, right?
That wasn't very subtle.
No, not at all.
So that, but that sort, and that speaks again, probably topic for another podcast. It speaks to the arrogance, I guess, in part. It speaks to the feeling that The feds are so overwhelmed, they're not going to catch us anyway. It speaks to even if they do catch us, it's, the penalty is going to be the cost of doing business, and it's worth it because we're going to make so much money.
It's a lost leader. Yeah. In a way. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we have to just say, thank you so much. Oh my gosh. God damn it. You got a lot done, Rick. You and Randy got so much done, and we can't, we can't thank you. You've inspired me so much to continue on, and because it's hard to like, you get exhausted, but you have to just keep remembering the faces behind why we're doing this. And I think that those are the reasons, and those are the motivators. And I love my mom so much. So I do this for my mom and everyone else's mom and dad that they love too. And we love you, Rick. And love is a big concept for us. Don always says this, he's not here, so I'm going to say it. Love is powerful, love is contagious, and love conquers alls. And I want everyone to go out, and if you want to be part of a coalition, let me know, get in touch. We're here, we're ready to go. We're getting so revved up about it. So thank you for listening, share, rate, and thank you again, Rick.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Susie and Trish, thank you for all you're doing.
Oh, our pleasure. All right.